Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Middleware Technologies. Today we'll be looking at Apache APISIX. It is basically an open source tool that provides the API lifecycle management facilities. So here in this article video, we are going to see how we can use this open source Apache APISIX tool to as a API gateway. Okay, so let us try to understand what is an API gateway. Okay, so let me search for Apache APISIX over here, and it will take us this URL is going to take us to the following portal related to this API management tool. So as you can see, it is basically an API management lifecycle management tool. Like, what is an API? Okay, so in today's world, like, all the applications are built based on the concept of API, which actually produces or consumes data in a particular format, for example in JSON format. Okay, so these APIs are called the backend services that are running in your system. Okay, but these APIs are not directly exposed to the environment or outside environment, but they are exposed via an API gateway, which in this case is the APISIX tool that provides this. Okay, and this API gateway provides us with the facilities like load balancing the requests, like sending the request to the upstreams backend services like the APIs, and it provides with the authentication and authorization facilities and monitoring and tracing facilities, which we can configure on the API gateway layer. Okay, so that is in short like what is API and what is API gateway. Okay, let us go into the documentation for APISIX. So here it provides good information on how we can utilize the APISIX. And if you go into the API gateway, it provides us with information on what exactly the API gateway is, and what is an API and what is an API gateway is, which we have already discussed. Okay, so let me go into my documentation, which I am going to follow for this video. So as I said, like, we are going to use open source API APISIX, Apache APISIX, to use it as an API gateway in this video. We are going to create a set of APIs using the Flask, Python Flask, and we are going to route the requests through API gateway to these backend services. Okay, so I'm working on Fedora 37 server or workstation with the Docker and Docker Compose installed, and also curl. So curl we are going to basically use for sending the HTTP requests to the APISIX gateway. So what is APISIX? We have already discussed it. So in a brief, like, we have discussed about what is API, what is API gateway, and what facilities the Apache APISIX provides as a gateway, API gateway. Okay, so let us go into the procedure of doing our setup for APISIX gateway. So as a first step, we need to ensure that Docker and Docker Compose is installed and it is up and running. Okay, so let me go into my terminal. So let me check the Docker service. Okay, so it is up and running. I have Docker, the following Docker version is installed on my system, and Docker Compose, this is the version that is installed on my system. 1.2, 29.2, and Docker is 23.0.1. Okay, and even I have curl that is installed on my system, which we will use for HTTP communication. Okay, so as a first step, like we need to ensure that the following services are installed and they are up and running, that is related to Docker. Okay, so let us go into our second step, that is launching microservices based applications using Flask. Okay, so for this we will need to install Flask in our system. So let me go into my folder Flask, but I have already installed Flask in my environment. So if you haven't already installed, like you can just go and run pip install Flask, and this is going to install the following requirements in your environment. Okay, and once the Flask is installed, like we need to create two set of Flask based applications, which are as shown below. So I have created two Flask based applications, which are hello Django. So it basically when a request is routed to this context /Django, it is going to return the output hello Django. Okay, and similarly we have hello Kiwi, which is going to do the same job. When a request is routed to /Kiwi, it is going to return the following output, that is hello Kiwi. So these are the two simple or basic Python Flask based applications that we are going to launch, and we are going to consider them as API services which are running in the backend. Okay, so let us launch these applications in the backend. So I'm running these applications in the backend using the Flask tool, and I'm hosting them on port 2020, and we can access it with any interface. Okay, so you can see the application is up and running. So if you try to access this one, so as I said, it is accessible on the context Django. Okay, so you can see we have got hello Django, and similarly, like I can run the other application also, that is hello Kiwi. This one I'm going to host on 2021 with interface, like any interface we can access it. So this is also running, and it is hosted on 2021 port. So let me try to access it. Let me copy this URL and update it. So as you can see, we are able to access the hello Kiwi application by launching it on the context Kiwi, and we got the response hello Kiwi. So we have our two microservices based applications based on Python Flask launched, and they are up and running in the backend. Now it's time to look at APISIX services that we are going to launch using Docker Compose. Okay, so let me go into my shell. Let me clear my screen. Let me go one folder up, and let me open the Docker Compose file. Okay, So API6 provides a set of components that we need to launch as a part of the API gateway service. So the first component which we are going to launch using the Docker Compose is API6 dashboard. So it basically provides us with the user interface to manage the services, the routes, and the upstreams that we want to configure. So everything can be done using the user interface. So for that purpose, we can use the API6 dashboard, and it is accessible on port 9000. And as you can see, like, we have volume mounted the following dashboard config, which provides us with the configuration for this dashboard. Okay, and the second service that we are going to launch is API6 using the configuration API6_config.yaml file, and you can see it depends on etcd. So etcd is a key value based database that API6 uses to store the configuration that we are going to do. So it basically provides us with a database to store the configuration for the API gateway service that is provided by API6. Okay, and you can see this API6 service is listening on all the following ports. We'll come to that in next steps. And you can see, like, we are also launching the etcd service over here, and we are volume mounting it at the following location. Okay, and etcd by default listens on 2379 port. Okay, so these are the three services which we are going to launch as a part of this Docker Compose file. Let me show you the configuration for dashboard. So this is the configuration file for the dashboard. So as you can see, it listens on port 9000 and allows access on any interface, and the etcd is configured to listen on 2379. And coming to the authentication section, like, we have the default username and password, that is admin is configured with this configuration. And we are not going to go into the plugins details more, but they basically provide us with the facilities for the API gateway, like authentication, authorization, monitoring. So all these facilities are provided with the help of these plugins, which we are going to utilize in the configuration. Okay, so let me go into the other configuration file, that is API6 config, and this is also like same as the dashboard. Like, it listens on port 9080, and it is accessible on any interface. And there is a key configured to access the admin API, so we need to actually pass this API key whenever we are going to access the admin API services with this component. Okay, so that is in short about the API6 config file, and these two files I have provided in the blog reference that I'm going to share with the YouTube tutorial YouTube video, so you can refer it from my blog. So let us go into my documentation again. So we have looked at the Docker Compose file along with the configuration file for the dashboard and for the API6 component. Okay, let us go into our next step, that is starting the API6 services. So we are going to start up the Docker Compose services now. So let me launch the services using Docker Compose up -t. So as you can see, like it has started up these following services. Okay, so let me check the services using Docker Compose PS. So you can see like these services are up and running, that is APISIX dashboard, APISIX gateway, the REST API, and the etcd service for storing the configuration. Okay, so if you go into the Firefox browser and try to access it on 9000 port, like you will see the APISIX dashboard is up and running, and you can log in with admin. Okay, so this is the user interface that you're going to see. So let me delete this one. So we'll try to reconfigure this routes and upstreams. Okay, so let us go into the documentation again. So we have launched the APISIX services, and we have verified that all three services are up and running. Okay, and we can now we can verify whether APISIX services are service which provides us with the API services is up and whether it is up and running by using the following curl command. So we are able to get a response. So as I said, like we need to pass this header, that is the API key, which we have configured in the APISIX config file. So this is required in order to access the admin API services, okay, which are actually listening on 9180 port. So now that we have verified the APISIX services, let us try to create the upstream. So what is an upstream? Okay, so upstream is basically the objects that we create in API gateway tool, which provides us with the information of the backend APIs. Okay, so basically it contains the information related to the backend API services. In my case, like these are the Flask Python based applications that I have launched. So I'm going to configure the upstreams as these Python based applications, and we are going to further utilize those upstreams to route our request from the from the API gateway. Okay, so let us try to create our upstreams. So we are going to use the following command. I'll try to explain you. So we are going to send an API request to upstreams API, which is on 9180 port, using the key, and we are going to pass the following JSON data. So as you can see, like we are creating this upstream so that it will route the request in a round robin fashion to the following nodes. So in my case, this node contains only one service that is listening on port 2020. Okay, so let me create this one, and this is the response that you get once you have created the upstream successfully. And similarly, like we are going to create the other upstream for the KV based application. Okay, So one thing that you need to notice is I'm creating an upstream with ID 1 for Django based application, which is listening on port 2020, and I'm creating an upstream 2 with port which is listening for the Kiwi based application, which is listening on port 2021. Okay, so this is the response that we are going to get. Now let us try to create the routes. So route basically it acts as a interpreted component which takes the requests from the client which are hitting the API gateway, and it forwards those requests to the appropriate upstream based on the context that we are trying to hit from the end user applications, that is client. Okay, so so this is simple very basic upstream configuration that we have route configuration that we are going to create. So let me try to show you. So here, whenever there is a request coming with a get protocol on this particular host and using the URL/Django, it is going to forward that request to the upstream ID with ID 1. Okay, so this is what exactly the upstream configuration is all about. Okay, so let me try to create this one, and once it is created successfully, you will get this following response that upstream has been created. And similarly, I'm going to create an upstream for the Kiwi based application also, which is configured with upstream ID 2. So whenever there is a get request is coming to the API gateway, it is going to route that request to the upstream ID 2. So let me create this one. So we have created the upstream, we have created this routes and upstreams. So let me go into the dashboard. So here you can see, like, we have the routes that we have created. So basically, whenever there is a request coming for /Django on example.com, it is going to route that request to the upstream, which is configured. Let me go into the route again and try to view it. So you can see, so this is our route. Basically, it gets the request on Django and it passes that request to the upstream ID, that is ID 1. Okay, similarly it happens for the Kiwi based application. It routes the request to upstream ID 2. Okay, and now you can look at the upstreams, like where it the actual upstream objects are configured. So you can see the first upstream is configured with host 120 localhost or 127.0.0.1 and port is 2020, and the other upstream is configured with port 2022. Okay, so it is basically going to send the request to the appropriate APIs in the backend. Okay, so now let us try to test the services. So we are going to send the following curl request with host example.com onto the following context, that is Django, and we are expecting it to respond with hello Django, that is being served by the hello Django flask based application. Okay. So we got a bad gateway. Let me try to check. Okay, basically the 502 error, gateway error that I was getting, it was due to 127.0.0.1 localhost IP address that I have configured with my route and upstream. So what I did is I recreated the upstream and the route. So basically I have created these upstreams using my IP address of the host, and the route I have did the same thing. I have recreated the routes using my IP address, and then I'm able to successfully hit the backend APIs from the API gateway. So as you can see, I'm able to get a successful response with the message hello Kiwi and hello Django. Okay, so basically, like once the request comes to the API gateway, it is further getting routed to the appropriate upstream backend using from the APISX service. So in that, actually it is not able to route using the localhost IP address that I have configured for the routes. So it was not able to actually get the backend services communicated. So if I show you the logs, so this is my APISX container. So if you see, like it basically gave the connection refused while connecting to the upstream from client. This is my Docker APISX service container IP address. From there, it was not able to connect to 127.0.0.1, that is localhost Django. But basically this service is running on my host machine, so we need to provide the host IP address so that it gets connected. Okay, so as you can see, like here we are able to basically connect successfully from. So let me rerun it and try to show you the logs. So as you can see, we are able to get to the Kiwi application and using this following host. So it has used the IP address and port 2021 to route to the backend. Okay, so that was the issue with the config. So okay, I wanted to show you in this video like how we can utilize the APISX service for managing for APISX service as a API gateway in this video. Thank you all. Thanks for watching this video, and you guys have a great day.